Hey all, Tom Moran here from Tom's Big Spiders. Well, this one, as you can see, is going to be talking a bit about intermediate spiders. And I hate using that word, and I'll explain why in a minute. But a few years ago, I actually did a podcast on this topic. It was for folks who didn't feel ready to jump into keeping some of the more complicated species. Maybe it's because of their care requirements. Maybe it's because of speed, because of temperament, because of the fact that the almighty old worlds tend to scare a lot of people. So what I wanted to do is offer up some species that would make good stepping stones to keeping more difficult species down the line. So instead of just saying this is an intermediate species, because that's a very difficult label to put on any spider, I'll explain why I have had a Grammostola species that were more active and more potentially defensive than, say, an OBT I had, a P. murinus. So you can't always tell. Behavior is always going to be a factor in this, and unfortunately they can be very unpredictable, sometimes in a good way. You may get a spider you think is going to be preparing you for a more difficult spider and find out that it is much more laid back than the one you got that you thought was going to be a beginner species. So that kind of makes this very difficult to do and makes the words advanced, beginner, intermediate kind of sometimes meaningless. One of the things people used to do back in the day was use something called the ladder system. The idea of the ladder system is if you're looking to keep some of the more difficult spiders, you kind of work your way up to it. It's almost like a belt system for a martial art. So somebody that's looking to keep a Chilobrachys species down the road may start off with a Panthabedus simani, that is one that tends to like a little moisture, likes to burrow. Then they would move on to an E. murinus, again, burrowing, moisture, and a bit more attitude and a lot more speed, and then work up to the Chilobrachys species. Now, the problem with this, back when the ladder system became very, very popular, a lot of the spiders coming into the hobby, the GAB species, Grammostola, Panthabedus, Brachypelma, were all wild-caught imports. So you were getting adult spiders right from the bat. So you could get this adult spider, raise it up, kind of get used to working with this giant spider, and then transition into something else. This is the way it was with my queen. When I got her, she was probably a wild-caught specimen. This was way back in the 90s. And I got to work with the larger spiders, see how they move, kind of get the lay of the land, so to speak, before moving on into other spiders. Now, why is this difficult nowadays? Because most of these are not available as adults or even juveniles. You're looking at getting slings. So if somebody says Brachypelma hammeri is a great starter or beginner species, you go out, you buy this teeny tiny sling. It is going to be years before you have a spider large enough to give you any sort of experience working with giant spiders. I use the example of Nikki, my Panthabedus Calcotas. I picked her up, I think 11 years ago, 12 years ago, a long time ago. She was a little 1.75 inch sling. It was back when I was trying to do the beginner species. Right now, she's about 3.5 inches or so, maybe 4 inches total. In that time, I have raised up hundreds of spiders, including hundreds of old worlds. So it didn't really work to give me I got some experience from her, but it didn't work in terms of preparing me for more difficult spiders down the road. The other problem with the ladder system is that some of the species that they would have you keeping to prepare for other ones are actually worse than the ones you're preparing for. So for example, a lot of times on the ladder system, they would tell you to start with a Somopius or Tarantulas species before moving into keeping the Poecilotheria. The majority of us to keep Poecilotheria find them to be much easier, more calmer, easier to deal with, shyer than Somopius and Tarantulas. So I guess they would prepare you for the potential of that, but you're not really going to see that with a pokey. So it's difficult to make a really good list that incrementally has the keeper go from keeping something very, very simple, a little more difficult, up to whatever species they've currently got their eye on. So before we get into this, every time I do one of these videos, it's like when I do the beginner species videos, this happens. Somebody will come on and go, you don't need to keep a beginner species, jump right in. Here's the deal. Some folks are able to jump into this hobby, grab old worlds, they go right to it, get to work. They have no problem with these species whatsoever. They're not afraid of them. They respect them. Their rehousings go well, and that's fantastic. And I think people get very proud of that fact and want to tell people in the comments section. The problem is, for every one of you, there's somebody that wants to take their time. I still converse with people in my comment section that do not feel ready to keep old worlds and feel like they need to work up to them. And that's okay. So that's where these beginner lists and intermediate lists come in. They give somebody a frame of reference to kind of look at and go, all right, eventually I would like to keep a Theraphosa species, but I don't feel ready for that size and the speed and the growth rate and the hairs. What could I keep before that to kind of work up to it? There is nothing wrong with that. So please, in the comments, I don't want to see people berating people and telling them to jump right in, ignore this. It may not be important to you, but since doing the podcast, I've had many people contact me and thank me saying they use this. Again, I was one of those ones, I kind of got right into it, but I know a lot of people that take their time doing so, and that's who this list is for. So enough of me talking. Let's take a look at some of the stepping stone species of spiders to get you prepared for keeping the more difficult ones. So here we have Brachypelma boime, or the Mexican fireleg. The bee boime is a beautiful Mexican Brachypelma species with stunning orange on its lower legs that contrasts strikingly with its black femurs and abdomen. And unlike some of the other brachys, this species grows at a medium rate, so those who start with slings won't have to wait years to have a colorful tarantula on their hands. They eat great, and they are usually quite visible overall. So you may be thinking, this species would make a great beginner, right? Well, not so fast. Although there are keepers fortunate enough to have calm boimes out there, many report their specimens to be fast, nervous, and very quick to kick hairs. Unlike its cousins, the B. hammeri or the B. classi, the boime does not grow out of its skittishness after putting on some size. Worse still, not only will this species readily use its urticating hairs to defend itself, but many say that their hairs are quite bad. I have 2 females, and both continue to be 2 of the most skittish spiders that I keep. Not only will they bolt around their enclosures when disturbed, but as you see here, they have no problem kicking up clouds of hairs. In fact, this was the first spider that ever haired me during my tarantula keeping journey. For a keeper looking to keep something a bit more advanced than your average beginner species, here's what you can expect from these guys. Unlike many of the other gab species of Grammostola, Phanapelma, Brachypelma, these guys are a bit faster and will bolt if threatened. They are also more defensive and will continue to use their urticating hairs right through adulthood. I think this is a great stepping stone spider for folks who want to graduate from keeping some of the more calm Grammostola, Brachypelma, and Phanapelma species and move into keeping something with a little more speed and defensiveness. Next up, we have the Chromatapelma, Cyanea or Cyaneo pubescens, the green bottle blue, or the GBB for short. Although this species often makes it on best beginner lists, including my own, the GBB can represent a step up in difficulty for folks used to keeping the gab species or the Grammostola, Phanapelma, or Brachypelma species. This is probably one of the best New World species to get folks used to the potentially defensive behavior of the Old World species or some of the more difficult species to keep, as well as offering a measure of speed. I can't tell you how many folks I've heard from over the years who talk about how fast this spider is. Many of them even call it a teleporter. Now, is it a teleporter? No, let me be very clear. It's not. We'll get into that later on. But just yesterday, I received an email from a keeper explaining that his GBB sling is the fastest spider that he has ever worked with, and he is actually intimidated by its speed. Heck, I can remember back when I first got mine being amazed at how much more skittish and quick they were compared to some of the other species that I was raising up. Sure, they are definitely spiders that can boogie if motivated, and overall they are much faster than the normal run-of-the-mill beginner species. I think that's where it comes from. Folks used to working with the Grammostola, Phanapelma, and Brachypelmas just aren't used to the bolting and how quickly they can bolt. So to them it seems super fast. However, because of this, it does make a good spider to get folks kind of used to and introduced to true spider speed. Honestly, though, they're not all that fast. So what do these spiders offer that can help somebody that's trying to get into more an intermediate level and work their way up to more advanced species? Well, they're faster growing, especially compared to the gab species. You can have an adult in 3 or 4 years. They are obviously, as we've already talked about, relatively fast and will bolt if disturbed. They can be very defensive, especially if kept in shallow enclosures. I like to give mine some height so they can web up. However, if you keep them in a more shallow enclosure, this can lead to them being very, very bolty and can lead to a lot of hair kicking. Both of my girls as adults went through a long stage of about 3 years where they would bolt, and they are heavy webbers, which is like a lot of the old world tarantulas that many people are eyeing. So what does a GBB prepare me for? It's a great first step for folks who feel the need to work up to keeping faster spiders. Their skittish behavior, speed, and webbing can definitely help them to prepare down the line for keeping an old world tarantula. And while talking about the GBB, there is another spider that is similar in appearance, but don't call it the mini GBB. I'm talking about Dolichothele diamantinensis, or the Brazilian blue beauty. This stunning species is a dwarf with females reaching only about 3.5 inches or 9 centimeters or so. They are highly sought after for their beauty and relative ease of care, and there are endless arguments between folks who like the GBB and folks who like the D. diamantinensis about which one is better. I have one that's it's close to my heart for certain reasons. I think they are both amazing spiders. You can choose which one works for you. Now, many folks will read New World species and think, well, those hairs, well, these guys don't have urticating hairs. Now, some folks will hear this and think, oh, then that makes this spider a good beginner. That's not quite true. They don't have urticating hairs, but they are fast, especially as slings. I remember when I got mine from Fear Not years ago, I picked up 3 slings and there was a note on it saying, be careful, I am fast. The fast was all in caps. I opened up the cap to rehouse one of them. That thing bolted out so fast that it was out and back in the enclosure in a blink of an eye. They talk about the GBB being a fast spider. Dolichothelys diamantinensis has it all over that species in terms of speed. I was just contacted by someone who informed me that she almost lost her because she was about to rehouse it. She opened up the container and it teleported up her arm and through the sleeve of her shirt in the blink of an eye during a rehousing. Now, she was able to get it back, but she's like, you weren't kidding. These guys are fast. Now, in terms of temperament, this seems to be one of those species where folks either have a calm and visible one or a skittish and shy one. Mine definitely falls into the latter category. I tried for 2 weeks to get some footage of her out and about, and what you'll see here is all I got, just a couple legs coming out grabbing this roach. That's about it. So what traits does this species have that makes it a good stepping stone spider? Well, they're relatively fast growers. That's awesome because they do start off as teeny, tiny slings. So recognize that that little sling won't last, be that small for that long. They're also very good eaters. And then I think the big thing they offer, well, 2 big things. First one is they are true teleporters. For many, this spider can be their first introduction to real speed. GBB is a nice little introduction to, yes, they can be a little bit quicker than some of the ones you may be used to working with. These guys will show you this is how fast a spider can be. And then finally, the webbing. Most of them are very heavy webbers, and this can get people used to working with spiders that web, rehousing spiders that web. This can be very important. So what does it prepare you for? Well, as we've said, the speed is incredibly important. Many of the arboreal species, including Old World arboreals, are known for their ability to teleport. Working with a D. diamantinensis would help prepare someone for that blistering speed. Also, as many tend to do a bit of burrowing and a lot of webbing, this behavior can definitely prepare someone for an Old World tarantula. Now, next up, we have another little spider that's also very quick. We have Neohalothele inci, the Trinidad Olive tarantula. I have raised up 9 of these over the years, and I finally got the lady that you see here. The rest were all male. So talk about rotten luck. I don't know if anybody else has had terrible luck like that with this species, but it has taken it took me almost 12 years to finally get a lady. Females of this stunning little dwarf species only get to be about 3 inches or 7.6 centimeters. So they're a little on the small side. However, they pack tons of personality in that tiny package. Throughout their lives, mine all did a combination of burrowing and webbing on the surface. As you can see by this footage here, they often have several entrances and exits, which makes trying to figure out which one your spider will pop out of during feeding time a lot of fun. Now, they're also very, very quick and can be very skittish, especially if you catch them outside of the webbing or before they're able to web up after a rehousing. Fun fact, this was one of the first tarantulas I ever had kind of get out and run around during rehousing. I was trying to rehouse one of what ended up being a mature male. It got out of the enclosure, raced around. I was glad I had the little container in to contain it. But that was my first introduction that, hey, some spiders want to go for a walkabout when you're doing a rehousing, and they can be quite fast when they do it. So what attributes does this species have that makes it a good intermediate species to keep? Well, again, like a lot of the dwarfs, it's fairly fast growing. So know that if you get a teeny tiny spider, it's going to grow quickly. That's something that's obviously different from the gab species where you can buy one and 4 years later still have a tiny sling. Their speed, they will bolt if disturbed, and they can be quite fast, again, especially as slings and as juveniles. And like the aforementioned Dolichothelys diamantinensis, they are heavy webbers, like many old world tarantulas, and that can get you used to those behaviors and having to rehouse a spider that has burrowed in web, because there is a learning curve to it. It's one thing to place a cover over, or a catch cup over a spider that's sitting on dirt. It's another thing to have to rip through webbing to find it, or to dig through some dirt to find it. So what can this species prepare me for? Well, between their speed, combination of digging and webbing, and their shyness, they remind me a lot of old world tarantulas. Anyone working their way up would get practice in their setups and rehousings, particularly when it comes to searching through the web and dirt for your spider. Now, next up, we have what was at one point one of the most defensive spiders I have ever kept. We have here the Lasio cayano Sosme. It was originally Tarantulas Sosme, the Brazilian blue. I have two adult females that I've had close to 12 years now. I adore them both. This species is highly sought after due to its gorgeous overall blue coloration, complemented by a pop of red hair on the abdomen. Now, these guys are most brilliant when they are younger and shortly after a molt, but older specimens like the ones you're seeing here tend to fade to a more grayish black color overall. You'll get slight pops of blue, but overall they've lost that brilliancy. That said, both of the ones you see here after their most recent molts did pop blue under the right light. If I can find a picture of one, I will post it up here to prove it. But as I've stated many times in the past, I think that this species in particular is victim to more Photoshop color saturation fails than any other species, with the exception of maybe the Poecilotheria metallica. I don't know what it is with folks jacking up the levels on these spiders to make them look so bright, but I've seen photos that make them look like they're almost glowing with radioactivity. So can they be bright? Yes, especially early on, but I've seen pictures where it's blatantly obvious that the spider is bright blue and everything around the spider is also jacked up. So stop, please, for the love of God. Now, what does this species bring to the table for those looking to bolster their keeping skills? They are burrowers. Most of the slings and juveniles will burrow, and they appreciate some moist substrate, although this species does come from an area where they both have floods and then periods of droughts. They are faster than other New Worlds. Mine were quite fast when they got caught out and about. Again, kind of having that old world type temperament where they don't want it. As long as they're not spotted, they're fine. But if you catch them out and about, there could be an issue. Many report that theirs go through a very testy phase. Mine went through a phase where there was constant bolting, threat postures, slapping the ground. Not a lot of hair kicking, but every once in a while some hair kicking. And this was even when they had a place they could run to. So they would stand their ground. This could be something that could be intimidating to folks who aren't used to getting those types of displays from their spiders. So what would this prepare someone for? As many of them exhibit fossorial tendencies, especially early on, this would help prepare keepers for a skittish spider with a bit of speed that likes to burrow. This would be a good stepping stone species for folks looking to keep Ephebopus in the future. And let's call it as it is, Ephebopus, which won't be covered on this because I do think with the moisture requirements and the potential attitude and the burrowing, they can be a little difficult to keep, but they can be wonderful practice for folks who want to keep old world fossorial Asian genera like Chilobrachys and Haplopelma. I will also point out that if you get one that goes through their bratty stage, it will prepare you for seeing a giant spider that is throwing up a threat posture, which I find them to be cute and endearing now, but back in the day, they could be a little bit terrifying. Next up on the list, we have Nandru or the Brazilian giant blonde. I got my first, an adult female, way back in 2016, and she became an immediate favorite. This big, fluffy, a bit spastic lady had a great feeding response, but she was also quite large, 7 inches or 18 centimeters or so, and had a heck of a feeding response. And she wasn't against bolting or running around her enclosure if disturbed. She wouldn't use a burrow, so this meant when she got scared, she didn't just slip into a hide and kind of duck away. She would race around the enclosure, which made some feeding times a little bit stressful. Now, a few years ago, I picked up 5 more slings, and I've been raising them up. These slings were a ton of fun to grow. They did a bunch of burrowing when they were smaller. Both the slings and juveniles, they had burrows, but have become much more bold now that they are young adults. A few of them still use their burrows. A couple of them have filled them in. Their temperament, Although, again, the ones that use their burrows will retreat to them, they are caught out in the open quite a bit, and they will bolt around like mad men and women when I open their enclosures. Seriously, these 5 are the ones I have to be most careful with during feeding time because I've had them almost bolt right out of the enclosure before. They'll race around, go right up the sides. They go nuts. So what do they offer to somebody looking to kind of improve the tarantula keeping skills? Well, they're fairly fast growing overall, which means you won't have a little teeny tiny sling for long, which means you're going to have to prepare for a larger spider sooner than later. Slings and juveniles in particular are quite fast and skittish. Heck, my young adults are as well. And they have excellent feeding responses and are very lively and active hunters. Now, I love that. Folks that keep some of the more active hunters will love that. However, for people that are used to spiders that are a little more dainty in their hunting approach, this could be something that they need to get used to. And then they're a decent size at around 7+ inches or so, or 18 centimeters. Now, an Entrapepii would be a great spider for someone who wants to experience a larger, more skittish spider with some speed, and would be a great lead-in species to some of the larger and more active genera like Formictopus, Panthabedius, and Xenestus. And speaking of spiders that would be good lead-ins to those, we have Acanthoscuria geniculata, or the Brazilian white knee. Now, okay, let's start this off with a huge disclaimer. Many folks feel like this species is a fantastic beginner spider, especially for someone looking to keep his or her first sling. In fact, I've had people tell me it is literally the best spider to start growing up from a sling. It was actually number 9 on my list of top beginner species chosen by keepers when I did that list several years back. This was a list that I asked folks, which spider do you think is the best beginner species? A lot of folks chimed in with the A. geniculata. Now, this spider is a hobby icon and one of the most popular tarantula species kept today. Not only are they gorgeous with their white striping and reddish abdomens, but they have amazing feeding responses, a really good growth rate overall, and they can get quite big. So what do they offer to somebody looking to keep larger spiders? Well, again, that excellent feeding response. Many folks believe that this spider, once upon a time, had a bad reputation for being particularly, quote unquote, aggressive. Nowadays, when you talk to folks, I think what they were seeing, and a lot of other keepers believe this as well, is just an awesome feeding response. If you open up the enclosure, this spider is ready to eat, so they are going to attack anything that hits that substrate or hits their webbing, including if you're trying to water them or pull out boluses. I can't tell you how many people said, I've gone in with the tongs, the spider charged across the enclosure, grabbed onto the tongs. That's because it thinks it's food. They have a fast growth rate overall. Not as big as some of the true giants that I've covered before in videos, but they can put on a decent amount of size, which is great. They are a larger species. Females can reach 8 inches or 20.32 centimeters. That is a very, very large spider. And I've heard that some folks even have ones they think are bigger. And they require a bit of moisture. Now, I know some folks are going to say, I keep mine completely bone dry with a water dish. I have found that both of mine, all 3, I had one years ago as well, if things get too dry, they would congregate around their water dishes, or if I moisten down a corner, they would hang out over that, which tells me they like a little bit of moisture. So this can help prepare folks for, well, larger terrestrials like Panthabedius species, Formictopus species, Xenestus, and even eventually Therafosa. They are big, active, fast-growing, potentially defensive, although I have to say my Acanthoscuria geniculata haven't been really bad. I've heard other people say theirs are bad. And so they're a good stepping stone to keeping those large tropical giants. Next up, we're going to talk about 2 spiders that are pretty much interchangeable on this list. To start off, we're going to do the Formictopus cancerides, or the Haitian Brown. They're so much more than a big brown spider. The P. cancerides has been in the hobby for decades and often goes overlooked by hobbyists. Slings are a gorgeous blue and possess one of the best feeding responses of any tarantula species. As they grow into adults, they go through many profound and beautiful color changes. Adults are large spiders, with some females reaching 8 inches or 20.32 centimeters. Larger specimens make fantastic display teas, as they have no problem sitting right out in the open. Although slings benefit from moist substrate, adults are incredibly hardy and can be kept terrestrially or on dry sub with a water dish. This species has become notorious over the years for its ornery attitude, and many will toss up angry threat postures if disturbed. I've received a couple from mine, but they usually occur when I startle a spider by dropping in prey. Although they have an abdomen full of urticating hairs, this species would rather toss up its front legs than kick a cloud. Now, similar to the P. canceritis, the Panthabedius muscara is a large terrestrial with a fantastic feeding response and amazing growth rate. Many keepers have reported their specimens reaching 4 to 5 inches or 10 to 13 centimeters in the first year alone. That means anyone starting with a sling is going to have a big fuzzy spider on their hands in no time at all. Now, this is probably the largest spider on this list, with adult females reaching 9 inches or 23 centimeters. That is a huge spider. Although temperaments obviously vary, Panthabedius are not as likely to throw up a threat posture as the P. canceritis. However, adults may be quite skittish, bolting to burrows or running around their enclosures if disturbed. Although mine have not been big hair kickers, they are more prone to kicking hairs than the P. canceritis. Now, what traits do these two spiders have that provide a good experience to the keeper? Number one, growth rate. Both can hit 4 to 5 inches or 10 to 13 centimeters in the first year. This means people trying to grow with their spiders when they pick up a sling don't have a lot of time to grow with these guys. These are large spiders, with adults reaching 8 to 9 inches or 20 to 23 centimeters. They have skittish or defensive attitudes. With the P. cancerites, it's going to be a threat posture. With the P. species muscara, you're more likely to get bolting and hairs. Either way, you're going to get to experience working with a giant spider with a bit of sass. Either or both of these specimens would prepare a keeper for the more expensive and a bit more finicky Xenestus species or Theraphosa species. Now, for folks looking to keep some arboreals, I offer you Brachypelma ockerti of the Peruvian Redrump. I have raised up 4 of these over the years, and as with the aforementioned N-Incy, I've struggled to get a female for quite some time. I got my first 2 about 11 years ago, and both ended up being male. The weird part is one molted out. He was a tiny little guy at about 3.5, 4 inches. The next one molted out. He was about 6.5 inches or so, so a big difference in the size of the males. A couple years later, I bought another, and this one was male too. This one I've had for about 6 years now. It looks like she's going to be a girl, although I'm having a hard time getting molts to sex, fingers crossed. But mine have all been very defensive. They can be quite fast. They will climb. This is a species that for a while people were keeping terrestrial because they heard Brachypelma. Usually they're terrestrials. This is a more arboreal spider. And when disturbed, they will often stick their little red butts in the air, kind of like panthers do, and they will let the hairs fly. Or I had one of my males who became probably the most skittish spider I've ever kept. He would constantly bolt around his enclosure, almost out of the enclosure, pause only long enough to send up a cloud of hairs before he'd start bolting around again. It was crazy, and he didn't stop this behavior until the day he died. The other male, similar behavior, a little less wound up though. This girl here, I was surprised I got footage of her because usually anytime I try to move her log to get any pictures of her, I get some hairs at me. So what do they bring to the table for someone looking for more difficulty? They are fast and arboreal, so they'll provide a bit more of a challenge than, say, the Avicularia species that tend to be a little calmer. I struggle sometimes with people that start with those to try to get ready for some of the more feisty New World arboreals and especially some of the Old World arboreals, because usually Avicularia are pretty laid back. They are very skittish. They will run and kick hair if disturbed, which again gets you a little more used to what you can expect for some of the more high-strung arboreal species. Now, what will they prepare you for? I find that this species' traits make it a good stepping stone to keeping some of the more advanced arboreal species like Tarantulas, Amazonias, and the next one on our list. Last up, we have Somopius Cambridgei, the Trinidad chevron, one of my favorite all-time spiders. Years ago, I purposely declined a more expensive freebie spider so that I could give the genus Somopius a shot, and I ended up picking up this female that you see here. At this point, I was already keeping several Poecilotheria species, and I wanted to try other arboreals. That was over 10 years ago, and I still have this amazing girl. Since then, I've raised up 6 in total, and they have been some of the most easy to manage of all my Somos. Now, what do these guys offer that could help somebody move into some of those more difficult species? Well, they are very fast growing. Old world arboreals can grow very quickly, and these guys grow very quickly, and they also get very large at about 7 inches or 18 centimeters. So that's a big spider. They are fast when motivated. Their slings are true teleporters. This means when you blink, they are gone. I've heard folks say that certain species are fast. When you see a true teleporter, you know it because they can be from point A to point B back to point A in a blink of an eye. They may do a bit of digging and webbing at first, like many of the other old world arboreals. Again, part of it is getting used to the care and the setups, and a lot of people are thrown off when they start keeping, particularly the old world tarantula arboreals that do a lot of burrowing early on, make dirt curtains. They spend a lot of their time kind of under the ground and webbing up behind their cork bark hides. This can kind of get you used to that. They have great feeding responses, which again is something that I find with a lot of my old world arboreals. So what does this prepare a keeper for? Well, like we've said, it's great for some of the old world species like Poecilotheria, Lampripelma, Ornithoctononinae, the Asian arboreals that you hear so much about that people love. It's also a good lead in to Tarantulas or keeping some of the other Somopius species. Now, this is a tricky one because I know there are folks out there that are probably going to say, well, I have other Somopius species that are very laid back. My Trinidad chevron is kind of high strung. I get it. And again, it comes down to the individual specimen, but I can say I've raised many of these. I've talked to many folks over the years that found theirs were fairly easy to get into. You could probably substitute one of the other Somopius for it. I know the Somopius pulcher that I have, I've had 2 of them. They were fairly laid back, but they are good stepping stones to keeping some of those more difficult and more venomous old world arboreal tarantulas. So obviously, when keeping these, the big thing you want to practice, and I've said this every single time I cover the topic, especially when we're talking about beginner, intermediate, advanced, your rehousings. You need to have your rehousings down. You have to be comfortable with your rehousings. If something's going to go wrong, generally that's where it's going to happen, which is why in this video, I try to concentrate on some species that may give you a little more difficult time during a rehouse. You may get some bolting. You may get some hair kicking. They're going to have speed. That's always something you have to contend with. They may be burrowing. Having to dig up a spider can be very stressful. They could have copious amounts of webbing. You've seen many of my videos where I've gone through and tried to peel through the webbing to find the spider. It can be tricky, and then the spider bolts out, scares the heck out of you, and you have a mess. So that's the biggest thing. If you feel comfortable with your rehousings, if you've worked with some speed, then you're probably going to be okay. So don't panic, don't stress it, but you can't. It's one of those deals where I have a lot of people ask me, am I ready for this species? Am I ready for an old world? I can't answer that for you. That is totally up to you. That's the way it was for me. So I would love to hear from other folks. Obviously, I tried to focus on spiders here, if you've noticed, that are very readily available and for the most part, rather inexpensive because people are going to be using the stepping stones. I figure they should be accessible. There are obviously many other species that would fit this. So I would love to hear from you guys. I would love for folks that took this type of measured approach to come forward and say, well, what did you keep? What species did you want? What did you keep to get ready for it? I'd love to hear that type of information. Again, this is just my opinion from what I've kept. I have a larger collection, but I can't keep them all. I would love to hear from the rest of you as well. So before we end this one, I am going to, on the bottom of this, probably in the first comment or maybe in the actual description, I will put links to all the videos I have for these species. I sometimes forget to do this, but the idea is if somebody wants to follow this list and says, you know what, I like this idea. I want to try this species out. Get me ready for it. I'm going to put a link to the most current husbandry video I've done on them so you guys will know where to start. All right. That'll do it for this one. As always, if you guys liked it enough to subscribe, really appreciate it. Click the little circle up in there. I'm going to put some other video. I'll put beginner species, something else over in here. You take the time to comment. I'll take the time to respond. Just know it can take me a couple days. I am off for the summer, but I've had a very busy summer so far, so I've been behind on comments. Guys, as always, stay safe. We'll catch you all next time.